Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to library. Our second day. Let me just love to give a few announcements, and then we'll have the court papers. Tomorrow we're going to have Donna Henry. She's going to be speaking on culpability, and it's on video gaming and other things, probably tax related, along with a lot of other wonderful books. Want to know what to read in the next 6 months or a year? You'll want to come. We have any games we're playing tomorrow? Yep. Oh, you're seeing, there we go. Okay. So you want to come? Okay. If you haven't gotten your murder history ticket yet, they are $30 per ticket, and it's dinner. And then you come and try to figure out who killed and how it was killed and the why and and all that kind of stuff, and it's great fun. So that's this Saturday. The doors open at 6:15, and we try to start serving at 6:30. So probably we have a bunch of people. Have at least one person say you have like 6 to the table or 7. Then have that one person come down and stay in your seat so that everybody can sit together. So I only know a few people that have reserved tables. But if you have a reserved table and you've got 4 people, send somebody down to get them at 6. Already, we still have our ESL class and going at 6:30. So if you know somebody that would like to work on their English, by our wonderful, raise your hand by our wonderful and enthusiastic language person. And if you really want to learn Spanish, she'd let you learn also. That we pay both. Summer reading kickoff starts Thursday, May 28th. I don't have all the information, but it has to do with unearthing stories, dinosaurs, and all kinds of fun things like that. So we have lots of unearthing to do this summer for adults and children. And if you know someone who's looking for a quiet place to study or read, or say you have a medical appointment, or you talk to someone privately, or you're an entrepreneur, somebody that's an entrepreneur, they can reserve our offices. They are free. There's 2, 3 of them, 2 or up to 4 people, and then the third one is 1 to 6. The third bigger one also is ADA. So if somebody is in a wheelchair or walker or something, if you use their TV in there so they can do all kinds of things. And we've had all kinds of people just asked us to their stuff in my makeup or selling oil. We can sell other things. We have ag people coming to work with their businesses around here for ag. I've had 2 people practice violin and for a concert. I've had people train on what a baby basket and how to take care of a baby. You name it, people are finding ways to do these offices. So please use them. You can go online, you can call us and make an appointment. And as long as you can also show up on the day. If they're not old enough, we're going to change the reservation, but if there's anything close, use those because they're a wonderful resource that we have. We just put it much to bring our families. Also, remember that if you find out what's going on in our newsletter, we now have a spring newsletter. It's written in Spanish and English, and it's easy. English, and it'll tell you what's coming up. If you want to know about books and dramas and things, and fun way to do that is self-indulgence and buy and that and invite other people to tell us about books they like. And try to be able to make it fun. That's on the website. And then remember that our website here, check things out, but you'll also find the bad weather or something that's supposed for holidays coming up. If you're traveling, you should like digital books to listen to. Or because now a lot of videos do not have CDs. So you can download your audiobooks there and travel with them. You can do that with Tupa or Libby. And you also have a PDF file where you can change the page also. Makes it easier as well. About it. So let me now introduce our speaker, Marc is going to talk to us about Batman. You know, you have like 51 different other books he's written, but he's also writing some stuff. Batman. So he's going to tell us about Batman and some other things. I'm not going to tell you what he's going to say, because he may change that a bit. We actually know the speaker. It's a documentary on about that Batman. We getting credit for the actually giving credit to the beginning. So welcome, Marc, and I will take it away.
Thanks for showing up. Midday, midweek, I appreciate it. So I prepared about 45 to 50 minutes and then Q&A. I understand that some of you may have to skip out early for work or other things. That's fine. I won't be offended. I'm not much worse. So I'm going to tell you a pretty wild story. The twists will keep on building, and there is definitely an unusual payoff to this story. So as you can see, it's about Batman. And before we get to that, I'm going to show you 3 numbers. This is not a riddle. This is not a code. I'm not expecting you to figure anything out. I just want you to put it in the back of your mind. And we'll come back to that at the end. So for the Batman story, we're going to start at the end. The back cover of my book has only one line. Batman's biggest secret is not Bruce Wayne. So even non-comics geeks know that Bruce Wayne's secret identity is Batman. Yet I'm saying I have a secret that is bigger than that. Despite what you've seen or heard, many people have heard this, and I'm going to just debunk it right now. My secret is not this. Batman does not wear Superman underpants. So I know you've seen that. It's not true. It's fake news. So we're going to go to the real thing for that. For that, we're going to go back to the beginning, 1939, the year that Batman debuted. Every Batman story since then had only one name in the credit. Batman created by Bob Kane. Bob was an artist. Here's Bob. And here's the thing about that credit line, Batman created by Bob Kane. The thing about that is, it is not true. There was another from day one. His name was Bill Finger. His name should be there too. Bill Finger wrote the first Batman story and hundreds more over 25 years. But in that time, they put Bill's name on one of his own comics exactly 0 times. Because Bob said, oh, well, I did Batman by myself. And people believed him. So as you can tell, this is not a happy story. So Bill and Bob went to the same high school in New York, but they didn't meet there. They met at a party a couple of years after, during the Great Depression. Bill was selling shoes. Bob was already working for comics, which was a new industry at the time. And Bob heard from Bill that he wanted to be a writer. And Bill seemed like he knew what he was talking about. So Bob was excited. Bob asked if Bill would work with him, write stories for Bob to illustrate. Bill said yes. It was almost a dream come true right away. So they'd meet and talk about stories, and Bob would then go to the company and present the stories. Now, Superman is on your napkins just to represent today, and also because he's from Kansas, as you probably know. Superman debuted in 1938 and basically launched the comic book industry. So when Bob, the artist, heard how much money the Superman guys were making every week, $800 a week during the Depression, Bob said, for that kind of money, I could come up with a superhero over the weekend. So he tried to do that. He went home and he drew something. Now, what he drew did not, that sketch, as far as we know, did not survive. But both Bob and Bill later described that drawing, and it looked like this. So I do not have compliments for Bob, and you'll see more why as we go. But I can say this, Bob had the ability to recognize other ability. Bob knew this was not good enough, and Bob knew who to ask. It's from Bill. So even though Bill was the writer, and Bob was the artist, it was Bill who changed Batman from this to this. Your Batman. This is the first appearance of Batman. Bob drew it, but it was based on Bill's design ideas, which he just said out loud, and Bob wrote them all down and took those ideas. And Bill also wrote it. Yet the only name there was Bob's, right from the start. So After they came up with this concept of Batman, they didn't even have this yet. They just had the concept. Bob, on Monday morning, as he said, and do this over the weekend, he went to DC Comics, what was then known as National Periodicals, by himself. He probably did not tell Bill he was going. He did not tell DC Comics that anybody else was involved. He simply said, I have this idea for a character named Batman. What do you think? And apparently they bought it on the spot. So Bob went back to Bill and said, great news. They want to publish Batman. So you'll write it because I can't write. And I'll draw it. And of course I'll get paid for it because it was my idea. But then I'll give you some of the money that they pay me. And Bill said yes to that. Now part of it was the standard arrangement at the time. The dawn of comics, the first person to come up with the idea usually was the guy whose name was on it, not just comic books, but comic strips too. Doesn't mean that it happened all the time. For example, the Superman guys did not agree to that. They both were credited from the start. But Bill agreed and began to work with Bob anonymously. So it wasn't just the first Batman story that Bill wrote. He went on to write the debuts of Robin, the Joker, Penguin, Catwoman, the Riddler, characters that are now almost as iconic as Batman himself. If Bill had done even one of them, that would be a big legacy. But Bill wrote all of them and more, including the name Bruce Wayne, the name Dick Grayson, that's Robin, the name Gotham City, the nickname The Dark Knight, Batman's origin, Commissioner Gordon, Batgirl, the Scarecrow, the Batcave, the Batmobile. I could go on. All Bill, all anonymous from the jump. So when Batman was 7, DC Comics published an issue of what was called Real Fact Comics. And in it, it told the true story of Batman and Robin, meaning how they came about in the real world. You already know that story, right? I just told you at the beginning of it. So as you can see in the comic, we see Bob, and he's telling what happened, how Batman was born. And he proceeds to say that I had my mom sew a costume. I invited my school friend Larry over. He posed in the costume. I drew Batman from that. Convenient, right? That there's no mention of Bill, the man who actually came up with the costume, or anything else involving Batman that was attributed to Bob. So even the company that was publishing Batman was beginning to perpetuate this myth that Bob did this alone. And Bill was seeing this. I don't know what his reaction was, but he definitely saw it. So then he worked hard for the next 25 years, creating all those characters that I just showed you. And then 1965 rolled around, and it was a turning point in more ways than one. For starters, this comic came out. It was the last Batman story that Bill wrote that was published in his lifetime. Also that year, this man did something that I will forever be grateful for. His name is Jerry Bales. He was a fan, and he read Batman comics every month, probably from the beginning, and he noticed only one name on all of those stories. And Batman was published consistently, continuously, every month from 1939 until today. So obviously including up till 1965, without missing a month, not for war, not for anything. Never a day, a month without more than one Batman story. Jerry thought, it's weird that I see only one name on every one of these stories for 25 years, Bob Kane. How could one person be creating all of this constantly for 25 years? So he wrote letters to DC Comics saying, who's really doing all this? And in those days, they would write him back, send a personal letter. Said, yeah, it's not just Bob, it's a bunch of other people, and probably our biggest writer is this guy named Bill Finger. They just told Jerry that. So Jerry was activated, and he found Bill, probably in the phone book, and asked that Bill would do an interview. Now, this would have been the first time that ever happened, because again, the public had never heard of Bill Finger, so no one could ask him for an interview. So Bill said yes. And for the first time on record, 25 years into this, Bill Finger told the truth about how Batman really. He did not say nasty things about Bob. He simply said what he did on Batman. But by saying what he did, it became clear how little Bob did. So when Bob heard that, he was not happy. Now, Jerry turned that interview into a 2-page article, you could say, which as you can see was on Heliographs. Those of you of a certain age will recognize that purplish paper and ink. And he made copies and he sent it out to Batman fans all over the country. So he basically interneted it before we had the internet. And then Bob saw this, as I said, not happy. He wrote a 6-page letter in response, in which he said, I, Bob Kane, am the sole creator of Batman. I told you already. I dare Bill Finger to say these things to my face. So after all of this, Bob is publicly calling Bill a liar, when the truth from the start was the other way around. So the only known response to this from Bill was a personal letter that I happened to find that he sent to a fan, in which he said, when he saw what Bob wrote in that letter, he had to call Bob and quite angrily speak his mind and jog Bob's fading memory. So I was thrilled to see this because it was the only thing I saw in my research that showed that Bill stood up for himself, spoke up for himself, and had some sense of advocacy. Because I spoke to people who knew him and they said he didn't seem to be haunted by this. He didn't walk around bitter. But that doesn't mean he wasn't bitter. It might mean that he swallowed it. It was a different generation when maybe that was more than the custom. So I was happy to see that this letter existed. Now, whether they actually went to dinner like Bob Bill suggested to talk it through, I don't know. But even if they did, we know this, it didn't change anything. And then within 10 years, unfortunately, at age 59, Bill Finger died. Alone, poor, basically unknown. So when he died, in his New York apartment, the medical examiner showed up. I found the report. As you can see, it says, add sadness upon sadness, natural death, no history, no family. On top of that, there was no obituary, no funeral, no gravestone, no hitting. That is the way the man who gave us Batman left this earth, as if no one cared. And it was not that no one cared, it was that not enough people knew. So it turns out that there was an article about Bill after he died. And I am happy about this, but it was published in a comic book magazine, something that most people never saw. If Bill died today, of course, he would be on every news feed in this country, in the world. In 1974, that was it. So I learned that no one knew for sure what happened to Bill after he died, but the persistent rumor was that he ended up in a potter's field. I had never heard of that at the time. It's a cemetery with no graves, usually for the homeless or people with no resources to pay for a funeral. It's a sad situation. And the potter's field for people who die in New York City is on Hart Island, which is in Long Island Sound. At the time that I was researching, you could not just go there. You needed permission and, of course, a vote. So before I tried all of that, I went online to look it up, which brought me down. The thought of Bill Finger, or anyone, frankly, ending up here after an already difficult life was heartbreaking, which I found no solace in the end, at any level at the end of Bill's life. So 25 years later, as a senior citizen, Bob Kane died. He was buried in California. He got obituaries everywhere, including the New York Times. And here is Bob's grave. We're not going to read the whole thing. It's an epic novel. We don't have that much time. I will read you a portion of it. Bob Kane, Bruce Wayne, Batman, they are one and the same. Bob infused his dual identity character with his own attributes. And then as you can see, he lists 10 qualities, including integrity and a love of all mankind. So I speak about this to all ages all over the world. And when I speak to kids, this is when the room erupts. You're erupting in your souls, but they are not, they're uninhibited. They get so angry at this. And they're right. I get it. Sometimes they boo. I don't encourage booing, but I get it. I don't necessarily stop it, but I encourage it. So it's again, it's just throwing salt in a very big wound. So that was all happening with nothing to do with me, of course. I'm just a dude, right? But I was born, and I did discover comics as a kid, like many kids did at the time, and hopefully still do. In fact, there aren't a few pictures of me, there are more than a few, I should say, of me as a kid with a comic in hand. That was not uncommon. For those of you that can't quite make that out and want to, check it off for your trivia card, that was Batman and the Outsiders #6, of course, right? Sure, most of you vividly remember that issue. And it wasn't just reading comics that escalated into this, homemade backyard costumes. I knew that I couldn't pull off Batman even as a kid, so I was Robin all the way, solid material. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 3 times. And it wasn't just dressing up, I was also, I guess you could say, an early pioneer of what they now call fan fiction. Writing a story that you're not authorized to write. I wrote this story about Batman when I was in high school, and I printed it, and I forced my friends to read it, even the ones that did not like superheroes, and I even forced them to write comments in the back. So again, I'm not saying I invented the comment section of websites, but I was doing it in 1989. So you be the judge. And as you can see, got about 18 staples. It was only 8 pages, so I don't know why I thought it needed so much work to stay together, but it is still together. I still have it. So. And then there was this time that I dressed up as a Robin, half-hearted Robin, not because I was trying to look like Robin per se in costume, but because I actually auditioned for Robin for this movie, the 1997 train wreck, Batman Forever. As you can tell, I did not get the part, but I did, try to get that part. So, 2002, I graduated college, I was on, starting my career, I was reading a magazine that doesn't exist anymore, a comic book magazine. And in that issue, there was an article about the creation of Batman. I grew up reading Batman, I knew that Bob Kane was the creator, except of course I was wrong. I had never heard of Bill Finger, I was already an adult. And so it was quite a shock to me to find out that the story that I thought I had been told, over the backdrop of a character who fights for justice, was not just, was not right. And when I saw that, I thought, why is this just one article in a magazine that most people don't see? This is a bigger story than that. And I was already writing, so I thought this will be something I can do. I can take this on. It's almost inevitable because I grew up loving these characters, and now I'm a writer. It's almost my obligation to try to tell the story on a bigger canvas. But first I wrote about this guy, who was actually my first love, and still my favorite superhero, Superman. So I wrote this book, and that book came out, which I thought gave me some leverage to write about Batman, even though I didn't really need leverage because Batman is more successful and popular than Superman, at least at the current moment. These things fluctuate, but he's a bigger moneymaker right now. But I came back to Batman. I came back to Bill in 2006. So you already saw what he looks like, at least this great picture. And one of the first things I needed to do was get photos of Bill, because I knew that this would be an illustrated book, because I write primarily for young people and all ages, but first and foremost young people. So I needed photos to give an artist. That's not me. You saw my drawing from page 8. It's not much better. I had to work with a professional artist who needed to know what this guy looked like. So I just started by looking for photos of him. And I will show you every photo of Bill that I turned up in my research, both in print and online. Here they all are, right? So this one you see. And this one. And that's it. So I was thinking what you're thinking. What? Only 2? That cannot be right. This guy did Batman. So I emailed experts, comic book editors, professors, historians. There are Batman historians, superhero historians. And I asked them all the same question. Where are all the photos of Bill Finger? And they all had the same answer. Oh, Mark, these are the only 2 I've ever seen. And 2 people said, Mark, these are the only photos of Bill that exist. Which I now know is a hasty thing to say, because what that really means is these are the only photos of Bill that we know exist. There could be more. Maybe we haven't looked in the right spots yet. And luckily, we are all trained for research. because we all know a game called hide and seek. Find what others can't, look where others haven't. Research is that on a bigger scale. And I love a challenge, and I also have those skills at a desktop. So I learned on the job how to be a detective and find things that no one else had found, but wanted to find. It wasn't like I was the first who ever looked. I was just the first who stuck with it long enough. So from 7 sources over 9 months, I found 11 more photos of Bill, none of which had been published in conventional books or on the internet. So I will show you a few of those. One was published, however, in a 1941 comic book, Green Lantern #1. Who's heard of Green Lantern? Bless you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Green Lantern is one of DC Comics' other biggest characters. Bill Finger co-created Green Lantern too. Bill Finger's name was not the Green Lantern. This was one of the only times. And if you zoom in on that photo of Bill, you can see that you cannot see. This would not help an artist draw Bill. And the next picture of Bill that I found was even worse. Could be anyone. I found this photo because I found this woman, Lynn, Bill's second wife. So when I started this, we knew that Bill had been married to a woman named Portia. We did not know Bill and Portia divorced and Bill remarried. I was the first author to ask Lynn about Bill. She knew still. And no one else knew, like any good spouse. Which meant that my book would have information that no other book or website has. So after Lynn's photo, I began to find pictures that were better. Bill and Portia, his first wife, 1940s. Bill and his son Fred at the zoo, 1950s. So Bill is again true to form in the shadows, next to his son Fred. This, of course, is not Bill Finger, that's a camel. Some people have never seen him before, they wonder. See there. Here's Bill in the 60s, the one standing. And by now you're probably wondering if I found any good photos of Bill, where you can see the guy up close. Like maybe Bill in the backyard, no, fertilizing the grass, maybe with no shirt on. Well, yes, I did. You can't miss him there. So, this is the best picture I could. Now, Lynn, Bill's second wife, told me that her son Steve had a great photo of him. That one that I just showed you before I knew about it. But he didn't know where it was. So I did what writers often do. I asked a total stranger to do me a big favor. I said, would you please look for it? I would gladly do it myself, but I cannot fly all over the country every time I want to search. I wish I could. And Steve said, sure, I'll look. And so 7 months later, he emailed me back and said, I found it. I'm thinking, don't rush, but of course you don't say these things, he's doing me a kindness. So I was so excited, I emailed him back, said, thank you so much. I asked some questions, including, hey Steve, where do you live? And it turns out that Steve lived in the same town as me. That photo was 10 minutes away the whole time. If I'm looking for it, I could have asked. So this makes me wonder which of you has a photo of Bill Finger in your house. There are more, I'll find them. I'll show up one day. You might want to check in advance. Be ready for me. But someone's got something. So again, hide and seek. So the first photo of Bill that I looked for, I thought I would find in 5 minutes. Because it's a photo that most everyone has. A high school yearbook photo. So I called Bill's school in New York, the Bronx. And they said, Mark, sorry, we've never found it. Which sounded odd. So I went there, and again, played hide and seek with their permission, of course. And looked through 1930s yearbooks for people with the last name Finger, which I saw. Yet none first name Bill. So the school seemed to be right. I was confused and disappointed, and I left. And then I was again speaking with Lynn, Bill's second wife, and by chance, Lynn told me something that she was one of the only people left to know. Lynn said that Bill was not his real name. His birthday was Milton, but he did not like that. So he changed it after he graduated. I told that to the school, and this is what they emailed back. Bill Finger before he was Bill Finger, which means I looked right at him, and so did they, which means you can be looking for something and find it and not even know it. So it was a wake-up call to me that you've got to slow down. You might have missed other things that would change the story. So it makes me try to be more aware, more present in my research and in my life too. So when I was doing this research and asking whoever I could for photos, from one cousin or family member of Bill, I was sent a small stack, and one of those photos was this. It was unlabeled. And I said, whose desk was this? And this person said, I don't know, it's just in our family collection. I have no idea. 70 years ago, 60, 70 years ago. And my thought was, not a big stretch, well, if anyone's going to take a picture of his desk, it might be someone who works at that desk, like whose job is at that desk, like a writer. So that's probably Bill. That was my assumption. But I didn't know for sure. I didn't know how I could find out. Until I met this guy. Except when I met him, he looked like this. His name was Charles. He was one of Bill's longtime friends, and not occasional, quite frequent actually, writing partners over a couple of decades, just not comics. And I asked Charles if he recognized that photo of that desk. It was a huge long shot. I'm going back again, 60 or 70 years. And Charles took one look at that photo and said, yes, that was Bill's desk. And I said, sure, you sound confident. I said, I know it was Bill's desk, and I know where it was too. And I said, okay, great. Where was it? And he said, 45 Grove Street in Manhattan. And I already looked up Bill in the New York City phone book every year since Batman debuted in 1939 to his death in 1974. 13 different moves, 13 addresses, and Charles picked right away an address that he wasn't looking at that list. He just said that address. It was one of the addresses on that list. So what do you think I did? I went to 45 Grove Street. Which, as you can see, is a smaller building, a walk-up building, not a doorman building, and it has glass doors here, and you can see down into the first floor of the building. And Charles told me that Bill lived on the first floor in that apartment. So I didn't know anybody in that building, of course. So I just showed up and I buzzed that apartment, and I said, "Sorry to bother you. I'm outside, of course. I'm a writer working on a book about something that happened in your apartment. I know how this is going to sound, but how would you feel about letting me in to take some pictures?" I said, "Dude, come on. Yeah, I know it's New York and you've never heard of me, but if you're willing, this is my name, and I'm happy to wait here a minute or two or a couple of minutes. If you wanted to look me up, you'll see that I'm a writer, and I'll just wait in case you're willing to change your mind." He said, "Okay." He was completely skeptical. I just stood there, and then a minute later, that thing buzzed, and I looked down the hallway and he opened his door and he said, "Come on." So when I walked in, the first setup I saw was this desk, which was next to a very old outlet, and this indent in the wall in this fireplace, which you've already seen. Indent in the wall and fireplace. And Bill's desk was not too far off from where this space desk was. So I said, "Did you know that the co-creator of Batman used to sit right there and create stories that are now turned into video games and movies that are seen around the world?" And this guy said, "I had no idea." So I'm happy to report that I found out that Bill actually did not. In my research, I came across two people. I came across 250 people, but I came across two people who I'd never met, who knew about this situation, and who both told me a story separately, unaware of the other, about something that happened 30 years before. And this is what they said. They said that Fred, Bill's son, Boy at the Zoo, grew up, lived near this beach, which is on the other side of the country. This is the state of Oregon. Took his father's ashes to that shoreline and spread them on the sand, the shade, like that. And as soon as I heard that, I knew that this had to be a book, and specifically an illustrated book to show this, because obviously there were no photos of this. We could create pictures in our heads that are sometimes better than the real thing, but I wanted to show. I wanted kids, everyone to see this powerful, poignant, private moment that no one ever expected from anyone else but these people were here. So there was a sucker punch, and I used to choke up every time I said it out loud. I mean, it took me 5 years of telling the story before I could say it without choking. Not that, there's nothing wrong with choking up, but it took me that long because it was so emotional for me after thinking for months that Bill ended up in a potter's field. Find out this is really. So, in 2012, after many years of research and work, my book came out. And after my book came out, things started to percolate. Things started to shift a bit. First thing that happened was, well, I'll tell you a few of the things that I put in the book just because I didn't mention them yet. So why did he change his name? There were 2 reasons. The first was he just didn't like the name Milton. And the second was, at the time, and even still in my experience, Milton is a largely associated with Jewish people. I'm Jewish, so I used to have Uncle Milton. It's a common thing in our world. And so he didn't want to sound Jewish because even in New York, the melting pot of America, even as recently, relatively speaking, as the 1930s, you would see signs posted that said Jews need not apply. And it went without saying that same thing for women, blacks, Hispanics, or anybody else but white men. You understand? Jews were not welcome. So we thought, if I can make myself sound less Jewish, I'll give myself a leg up maybe, whatever I end up doing. So he changed his name to Bill and never looked back. In fact, when Lynn told me that his real name was Milton, I said, oh, that's a great fact that I'd love to put in the book. And she said, oh, actually, he really didn't like the name, so it's better if you don't put it in the book. And I said, oh, Lynn, I completely understand. It's just that, for academia and for posterity, it'd be really great to document that. Do you think it might be okay? He said, no, all right, you can do it. Yeah, it wasn't a hard sell. I didn't want to be manipulative, but I really wanted to put it in lesson. So here's Bill's desk, which you've already seen. And in fact, here it is again. I used that picture to reference, for the artist to reference. Here's the indent and the fireplace, and now you see the black lamp and the side table and typewriter are all the same things. So what you wouldn't notice in this picture, and probably not even in this picture, is this little thing next to the typewriter. And even if you noticed it, you wouldn't know what it was. And even if you did somehow figure out that it's paperweight, you would assume that it's just a little detail that the artist made up, not a real paperweight that Bill Finger owned, but it was a real paperweight that Bill Finger owned. And the reason that I know that is because I own it now. This is a scarab, not from ancient Egypt. It's from a museum gift shop, but it's still valuable to me. And the reason I have it is because of Charles, Bill's friend. When I met him for the first time, he said, Mark, this paperweight is one of the only things Bill owned that still survives. And I'd like to give it to you. And I said, Charles, I would love to have it, but I can't accept it. He was your best friend. And Charles said, Mark, I can tell you will take good care of it. So when he put it like that, how could I say that? I put it on my desk because I wrote a book about the guy whose desk it used to be on. That's where it is right now. When my kids were young, my daughter at the time was probably 7. So she, my kid had grown up with this in our world, this story of Bill Finger, for better or for worse. And my daughter, out of the blue one day, said, Daddy, if we ever have a fire in the house, and I have time to grab only one thing, I'm gonna grab no little paperweight. And I said, Sweetie, that is so lovely. Thank you for saying that. But if we ever have a fire, just get out. I'll get the paperweight. Luckily, we haven't had that's a test. So here's how my book ended. Zoom in. From Milton to Bill, from salesman to Batman, from secret co-creator to unsung legend, Bill's most important story was not what he wrote, but the one he lived. Will his name ever be added to every Batman story? Batmanians are keeping their fingers. Yeah. So I'm not, I don't use puns generally, but I did here, it's built it, so it was tribute to Bill. Now, after this, the book doesn't sell itself. I have to go out, like any author, and discuss it and promote it. And I did that very loud all over the world. Spoke to kids, I spoke to adults, I did a TED Talk, which was a huge privilege and also the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever done, is I was there on a night where there were 30 people total. Myself and 29 others all doing short TED Talks, one after the other. And we were randomly ordered, so I had no control over who I followed. And the person before me was about halfway through the night. And his claim to fame was that he created a test for prostate cancer that costs only $5, which I guess is a big deal. I don't know how much, I forgot how much they used to cost, I guess much more than that. So he created this really affordable way to test for prostate cancer, and he was 15 years old. So I saw him talking about Batman. Yeah, it's fine. Now, this was the last time to date that I dressed as Robin, not for kids, not because I was going to a comic convention or trick-or-treating, but because I made a book trailer for the book, which is actually a thing. Authors make book trailers sometimes. And I went all out, I did a little story about Batman. So if you're keeping score, that's 4 times that I dressed as Robin. 5 if you count this, which I know some people might. Now, it wasn't just speaking and blogging and telling the story that way. I was also trying to help build behind the scenes. So before the movie The Dark Knight came out, that was 2008, I actually took it upon myself to email the head of DC Comics. And I asked him if Bill's name could be included in the credits for the movie. And the reason was because they already credited him as a writer. After he died, they began adding all the writers' names to the stories that they were never credited on in their lifetime. And I was saying simply credit him as the original writer, and also the person who coined the nickname, The Dark Knight. So I knew that if I asked DC to say, if you call him co-creator, that's a non-starter. That's a subjective term, and that's also a legal term for them. They wouldn't even engage. So I was trying to be strategic and say, I'm just saying, do the legal thing, or the moral thing, and just say this movie was titled after a phrase coined in a story written by Bill Finger. That was totally reasonable. Of course, never expected to hear back from this guy, but to his credit, he did write that. Thanks for your passion for our creators and characters, but there are no plans to credit Bill on The Dark Knight. That's all he wrote. So a smart person would just let it be. I'm not so smart. I wrote him that. So to be clear, I'm not asking for a label or a title. I'm just asking for that simple statement of fact. And this time he actually wrote back again and said, and told, with all due respect, I'm not in this discussion. Fair enough. He did not have to write me back. He did. So I thought, and again, this is, by the way, this is before both my Batman and my Superman book came out. I was a complete unknown to him in this world, so he didn't have to engage with me at all. Even if I was known, he wouldn't have to engage. But so I give him credit for writing back. I don't give him credit for backing down for something that they should have done. Very simple. Without any worry about violating the contract or upsetting the Kane estate, or even being marginally interested. It's 100% true that they chose not to do that. So, another big turning point here, 50 years after the 1965 turning point. This one's arguably bigger because everything changed because of this, Fred, son. So, you've already been to that hill and beach. That's where the ashes were spread. And when I was doing research, I was also looking for photos of Fred, and believe it or not, this was the best one I found. I know, super dark, super 70s, but you work with what you find. And now, when I started the research, I learned 3 things about Fred Finger right away that would change the course not only of my book, but of something way bigger than that. And I'm talking day 1, maybe hour 1 of research. I learned that Fred was Bill's only child. I learned that Fred was a gay man. And I learned that Fred died in 1992. So to me, this added up to the likelihood that he was the last person in the family. So I wrote a book about this. I've been to 20 countries and 30 states speaking about it. But if I want to change that credit line, I need to do more than that. I need to find an error. And it looked like I was 15 years too late. So you can imagine my surprise, pretty constant state when I was doing this project. Again and again, something new would surprise me in a big way. This was the big one. You can imagine my surprise when I learned that 2 years after Bill died, his son Fred, this man, had a daughter. Bill's only grandchild. Her name is Athena. She could do what no one else can. So I was again back to square one with another game of hide and seek, trying to find an heir that seemingly the public did not exist. So this was the 2000s, first decade of the 2000s. So, I had some options to try to find her, but I didn't think of any of them. Here's why. I just wasn't yet there thinking that social media would be a good place to start looking for people. So I had a Facebook account, didn't check it, didn't have a Twitter account yet at all, and Instagram didn't exist yet. So, strike three from the get-go. But there was a place that did exist, which someone actually had to tell me to check. Didn't occur to me. And this place was called MySpace. Does anybody remember MySpace? Oh, we're okay. So it was like a four-man Facebook. It's still out there. I think it's a totally different website. Probably don't need it. So I went to MySpace and I searched her up. And only one person with the name Athena Finger popped up. And the profile picture had a caption that said, wasn't a person in the picture. The caption said, "My dog Bruce Wayne." So I said, "It's has to be her." So I messaged her and she wrote me back. And so began the dance, trying to feel each other out and figure out what this means and what this means for Bill. So she said, Bill died 2 years before I was born. I never met him. And you could probably tell me more about my grandfather than I can tell you, but this is her exact phrase, but I'm very interested to know what you have to say. So I told her what I knew, and I said, I'm hoping that you're willing to contact DC Comics, not just for your family, but for fans. And she said, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I said, I know we just met, I'm a stranger, but please. And it took some more convincing, but she came around, decided to do it. She didn't know what we would do, and I said, neither do I. And I know why she said no. It's a daunting proposition. Batman is owned by DC Comics, which is owned by Warner Brothers, which is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, which can buy and sell every one of us and everything we've owned in our entire lives. Where do you start? Do you call the 800 number and say, oh yeah, how do we add Bill Finger's name to Batman? You didn't know. I said, let's figure it out. And I've gotten this far. Let's figure it out. So she came around. And so began a 9-year odyssey to try to change that credit line. And this was no small task because Batman is no small character, as you know. According to Wikipedia, which is cites its sources, he's a $30 billion character. One of the top, I won't show you the whole list, but one of the top characters. Yet still not as big as Hello Kitty somehow. I don't know why. Hello Kitty's big. It's fine. So Athena and DC had on and off negotiations and discussions for those 9 years. I was in the background, not family, I was not privy to these meetings, but I was giving her information and support and encouragement. And in 2015, DC Comics did something that they've never done before, in fact, that no comics company has done before. They decided after 76 years of anonymity that Bill Finger should come out of the shadows. And they said that they would officially add Bill's name to Batman. And just keep in mind that when I was doing this, I had lots of support from friends and strangers alike, but also many skeptics who said, I'm cheering you on, Mark. It's great. I want the same thing you do, but just, come down to earth, dude. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. It didn't happen in Bill's life. It didn't happen in some friend's life. Who are you to think you could do anything? And I said, I don't think I'm anybody, but I know this. I am persistent above all. I will put in the time that it takes to either do it or know that we can never. No one had gone that far before. And this is what happens when you split this thing. So Bill had worked his whole career anonymously. He might have seen his name in an article in the 60s a couple of times, but a headline never. Then within a 24-hour period, depending on your algorithms, Bill's name was almost everywhere that you looked. Just too late for Bill. So now every Batman story is different. The same but different. whether it's a comic book, a video game, a TV show, or a film, they all now say Batman created by Bob Kane with three short words that make a world of difference. So when this happened, the response from fandom was extremely moving, and not just for me, for anybody who cares about Batman or superheroes or intellectual property in general, or just seeing the right thing happen. So there were hundreds, maybe, I don't know, thousands of tweets about this. I couldn't keep up with them, but this one stood out. On my honeymoon in Mexico from Ireland, just saw the news, thrilled for you, Bill, and the Thinker family. One person who might not have been thrilled, though, is this guy's new wife, whose husband is tweeting about Batman on their honeymoon. That was funny, but also sweet. And so then, 2017, 2 years later, because this was unprecedented, it caught the interest of some filmmakers, more than a few, but we ended up making a documentary about this on Hulu. So it's a 90-minute feature documentary, which tells a version of the story that you just heard, but it's more than just me talking, luckily. You get to meet Charles, you get to meet Lander, and Cass, and a bunch of other people. And there's things in the movie that I don't tell you, and there's things that I'm telling you that are in the movie, of course. But so this was the first film ever made based on nonfiction for young people, and it was the first documentary that Hulu made. This was a story that was just desperate to get out. And we put in the film. I asked him. I did not direct or produce this. I was in it, but I wasn't in charge. I said, we put this tweet in, it's just so great, and they need to be convinced, they loved it too. So we put that tweet in, and then the guy in that tweet watched the movie, and tweeted again, said, I just watched the movie, I'm thrilled to be mentioned in it, and by the way, I'm still here. So this whole thing has just led to all kinds of different things. Now, you'd think, typically, when a person dies, that's the end of the story. Not the end of the memory, but the end of the story, right? But then maybe someone comes along 30 years later and writes a book about it. Okay, so after you get a book, most people do not get a book. After you get a book, okay, now your story's really got to be done, right? We can move on. But then that book leads to a big change where you're now more well known. You get the credit that you've deserved in your life. Okay, dude, now you got to be all. Everything's got to be over now, right? You kind of you're saying you've gotten your chance to be in the spotlight. The stories must be over by now. Well, then they make a movie about it. So it seems like certain stories just never go away. And this one is one of those stories. Because the same year that the movie came out, a bunch of us met in the Bronx on a very cold December morning to do something else that had never happened before. And that was this. We gathered with whoever showed up, including a bunch of kids from a school field trip, and a council member in the Bronx named Richie Torres, who is now has a higher level government position. I think we'll see his name again on a bigger level. He's just so good at what he does, and so passionate and statesmanlike that I think we're going to see him on a bigger stage at some point. So we were there that morning with Athena, Bill's granddaughter, and Steve, his stepson, the guy that had the topless photo back here, to unveil the first ever street renamed for a comic book creator in New York City, which is the unofficial world headquarters of superheroes, both fictionally and in the real world, because that's where the comic book industry, basically, in America, was born. So for me, it was really a point of not proud about myself, but for Bill, that he could be the first comic book creator to get such an honor in New York. Bob still doesn't have a street. And Bill doesn't have a grade. So when people say, where can I go pay my respects? I say, well, it's not so glamorous, but you can go to the corner of 192nd Street in the Bronx. I mean, that's all we've got right now. But it was just such a moving thing to see that he got his due in this city, where he basically changed history. Because Superman was one thing, but Batman was an entirely different kind of character who had more depth than Superman did at the time. There was a motive for Batman to do what he was doing. Superman was good for good's sake. Batman was a scarred person. He was trying to get justice for people that he didn't get as a himself. And that was new in comics. That was not done before Bill. Bill changed the way that we write comic characters. So they made two signs, actually. One had been mounted the night before. They have to do all that. Officially to do all that. And then the other one, I got to post with for 5 minutes, and then Athena got to take it out. Just very lucky. So, the New York Times, the city of The paper of record in the city where Bill changed history multiple times. Never covered Bill in his lifetime. Also did not cover my book, which is fine. Did not cover the credit change, which was bizarre. But they did cover the street renaming. And just to be clear, this is Manhattan. They probably rename the street a week there. It's not a big deal. I mean, it is a big deal to get it done. It's a lot of bureaucracy, but it's not a big deal in the grand scheme. But when this many people showed up, both the Times and Richie Torres, the council member, said, we never get even a fraction of this sort of thing street name. And it was nothing to do with me. It was everything to do with it. Not even everything. It was Bill. It was about Bill, not even that. By then, people knew about Bill. They felt this wrong man deserved this attention, this moment. So the Times covered it. And then after that, something also exciting for me happened, which was that someone tweeted about it. A lot of people tweeted, but this one tweet stood out by a guy named Marc. So some of you may know him as a character named Luke Skywalker, Star Wars, or possibly as the voice of the Joker from the 90s animated Batman series. Either way, he's a legend. He tweeted about this. He was not there, but he tweeted about it, which was extremely exciting. And then a few months later, as if it couldn't get any better, Mark Hamill, Star Wars, tweeted about my book. So I showed this to my kids. I said, look, Mark Hamill tweeted about my little book. And they said, Dad, that's so great. So what do we need them? And I said, okay, kids, have a seat. Let me explain how the internet works. Never, but it's still cool, right? By then, don't worry about it. And it lost interest. So I showed you three numbers at the beginning, and we're coming back to them today. I don't expect, like I said, it's not a challenge. It was just something to put in the back. So these three numbers represent three of the rejections that I experienced along the way trying to get this story out. The street renaming took 6 years of back and forth emails and proposals and meetings and declines and some rude comments to me actually about how I was trying to promote someone who is not that important or pop culture is not significant in the long run. I could say there's 25 statues in Central Park where people that no one remembers. Their star has faded. Bill Finger's star is now rising and will never fade. This is a cultural contribution that transcends comics. And they still said it, not worth our time. So I circled back to the council member to get this back. Then 9 represents the number of years it took to get this movie made. We actually had 2 stops and starts, 2 other companies trying to make a documentary before the credit change. But then they both backed out for different reasons. And then the day that the credit changed, I emailed the directors of the second version that didn't happen and said, did you hear that Bill just got credit? And they said, oh my gosh, we're about to walk in and pitch who? We could pitch them. This story said you could pitch whoever you want. You can pitch the Hallmark channel, I don't care. Pitch the web station. And they pitched it, and people said yes right away. And then 34 represents the number of editors who rejected Batman. And this was after I did the Superman, which won awards and got some nice attention. And Batman is bigger than Superman, and yet I still got rejected 34 times. One editor said, oh, Mark, I love Batman, and my son loves Batman, but I just don't know who the audience for this book is. And I'm thinking, am I Land Candy Camera? You, your son? You just told me who the audience. I mean, do we need to hard sell Batman? He's $1 billion character. But she might have just not liked it. It didn't tell me. So throughout all of this, I was still optimistic that this could happen. And people say to me all the time, well, didn't you ever want to give up? I think, because no one ever wants to hear about the time that you did nothing. We're speaking to this lovely crowd if I did nothing. I knew that I had to get bruised and banged up and take my armor off and buff it and polish it and put it back on if I wanted to get a good story. Didn't know there would be a successful end to it, but I knew there needed a better story than saying, I stopped at the start. So no, I don't think about it. I have one more short story that I can share if you want, or we can just jump into questions. I don't know what your time frame is. All right, so this one, going back to the beginning. It's short.
And if you need to leave, you can.
And if you, again, you need to leave. Just don't smart out and throw your plates down. All right, so meet Jerry Robinson. I mentioned it before. He was one of the first ghost artists of Batman. Meaning, yes, Bob put his name on every Batman story, but eventually he was neither writing nor drawing hands. So Jerry was one of the first and one of the best, in my opinion. When I met him, he looked like this. He had lived a long, fulfilling life as an ambassador in the field, in the industry of comics. He was a lovely, lovely. I would sometimes call him, sometimes he would call me, to share some memory that he had. And you think, okay, he's a senior citizen, he's, doesn't have a lot going on, maybe that's why he's so eager to talk about Bill. It wasn't the case. This man had an interview with some outlet. Every time I talked to him, he said, I just came from an interview, or I was about to be interviewed after this. This man was not, looking for things to do. He was busy. And so Jerry told me, before he told me, I told him, I've been looking for information on Bill. What I'm really craving is to find something that he wrote. I don't mean a story, I don't mean a script. I mean something that he handwrote, like a letter, something personal, because I need to get at his personality. I knew about his work, I didn't know much about him as a human. And so Jerry said, well, why don't you come to my apartment? And I said, well, sure. So I went to his apartment in New York, which was a gold mine. This man saved all of his original art from, not all of it, a lot of it from the 40s. Every one of those pieces is a 6-figure or a 7-figure piece of art now. He had the forethought to, he wasn't saving it to make money on it, he was saving it because it was art. And he wanted to save his work. A lot of guys didn't save their work. He did. So he had all this beautiful work on the wall. Plus he said, Mark, when I was a young guy in the 40s in the comics field, I had an apartment with some other comics creators, and we had some pretty wild parties. And I know what you're thinking. Wild comic book parties sounds like an oxymoron, right? But apparently they did. And he said, and I had a guest book. Everybody who came to the parties would sign it. And one of the people who came to those parties, of course, was Bill Finger. So then he took out this guest book. It was from the 40s. It showed its age. It was, the covers were there, and it wasn't fully bound anymore. And it, had page after page of signatures, letters, drawings from the name of Golden Age great, if you know comics, that person was probably in this book. The book, to say it's priceless, is an understatement. And these people didn't just write their name. They wrote a whole page, artists drew a whole full page, which would have taken an hour. They would walk into the party, everyone's being wild, and they're sitting down drawing. And one of the people in the book was Bill Finger. First time I saw his handwriting. Dear people, I come up here as a guest. Is Jerry hospitable? He is not. He goes out of his way to beat me at darts. I go home with a heavy heart. Bill Finger. P.S. I just beat him. P.P.S. Now I'm light again. So I went back to my college days, textual analysis. Was reading too much into this. I'm thinking, we never heard from Bill in his life. Personally, he read his work, but never his own voice. And here we are hearing it. And I was worried about Bill. I worried about his heart. I worried about his soul. How it could have felt to have been omitted from the record his whole career, and see other people eating up at him and praising Bob Kane, and he gets nothing. And I felt like, this is Bill's only statement on his life. It's all we've got. His last words are, now I'm light again. I'll take it. So I said to Jerry, I would love a copy of this. But this was 2006. I didn't have an iPhone. Nobody did. I take a picture of it. I said, and I didn't want to ask him if I could run down to Kinko's with his priceless guest book. So I said, I just said it, is there any way that I can make a copy of this, or you can send me a copy? He said, sure, we can make a copy in my home copy, in a home office copy, a desktop copy. So I said, okay, thank you. So we did that. I was very nervous to ask him. So we made a copy. I go home, I go, skip ahead 3 years, I've been through 34 rejections, but then an editor says yes. And I said, I'd love to show this in the back of the book, the only known example of Bill's handwriting. And my editor said, I agree, except we need a better copy. It's not very good. I said, I agree, it's just a home copier. So I called Jerry and asked if we could make another copy. He said, oh, Mark, I'm so sorry, you can't. And I said, okay. And asked why. He said, well, it's just that I don't know where it is. And I said, lost the book? He said, no, I have the book. I can't find this page. So right there, I just said to myself, never hesitate to ask. Because now that made me the only person in the world, known person, to have a copy of Bill Finger's handwriting. If I had not had the courage to ask him that day, and just run the risk of offending him or making him feel awkward about saying no, or make him feel nervous about saying yes, I would not have had that lovely glimpse into this man's personality. So I was so grateful. I went to the editor and said, this is all we've got to make it work. So we did. And I'm happy to report that a few years after that, I heard from Jerry's son after Jerry passed that they found the page. But for a few years, it's only me. So thank you so much for coming to listen to this story. Now, I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments.
That was wonderful.
So is his granddaughter an artist also?
She actually does paint. She does commissions of recreations of Batman comics. You can Google her and see her stuff.
You still live in New York?
No, I live in Maryland. But at the time when I was doing this, I was living in Connecticut. So I would take the train to and from New York to go, count the pavement and go to, offices of vital records, and go to former sites where Bill lived, like Grove Street. It's funny. I was in New York a couple years ago, so years after this. And I went to 45 Grove Street, that apartment that I showed you where the desk was. And there was a tour. I mean, it's out of the movie. There was a tour right there. Tour walking through and stopping, and because that building is other notable. There's other notable things about that building. And I wasn't in a tour, I just lingered and just wanted to see if they mentioned Bill Finger, which I didn't think they would. And of course he did. So then I'm not normally like this, but then I said, hey, can I just add one thing? And I said, the book creator of Batman used to live there. And some of the people were interested, but the guy moved there. I said, I don't need you. Yeah. And I said, that's what we said, I'm not gonna take over here. Questions? I'm sorry? Where did the granddaughter live? The granddaughter, Athena, lives in Florida. Yeah. Yes.
Is she entitled to his blood?
So legally, no, because there was no, Bill had no contract, even with Bob's. But morally, yes. And so she did compensation. In fact, she began to get compensation within a month of me finding her. Or rather, within a month of her contacting DC Comics, they began to send her royalties for reprints of Bill Finger stories. So not something they do every month or even every year, but it was something, it was more than she was getting, which was nothing. But it wasn't what the family deserved. If they're gonna do the right thing, just do it right. And so she accepted that for a while, but then when they got to the negotiation about the credit, of course, they had to discuss that this is a $30 billion character. Your company publishes 12 comics a month and as a headline. This is just not sufficient. I wasn't there, but that's, the gist. Yeah.
In your research, was there a point at which you felt that like you had everything you needed to finish those stories?
So I have more than anyone ever had, but it never felt like enough. And at one point, my wife said, I found someone else. And she lived in a small apartment, we shared an office, and every time I found something, I wasn't in that. I know you're looking at me and think this guy was definitely high school football quarterback. I wasn't. So when I had a big research room, I would do a fist pump, and I would say, I would get excited. And so my wife was very supportive. But at one point, she said, look, I'm right there with you. And don't forget, you've got to write a book. Like this has to turn into something. So she kind of course corrected me a little bit. So I would have probably kept going a little more, but I could start the book and even start, the process of editing the book with an editor and still find things that happen. And to be honest, I've added things since the book's been published, not to the book, to my talks, to my blog. So yeah, it was a hard thing to really, cut bait on. Yeah.
So you said that Bill died poor and alone. Did you ever find any record of what Bob was painting or how that compared to what Bob was making?
Yes. Well, I don't have a record of it on paper, but Bill and Bob worked together only for the first couple of years, maybe, probably 39 to 41, 42, I'm guessing. And then DC Comics found out that Bob was not really writing all this. He made it seem like he was doing everything. But other writers knew Bill, and they said to DC, oh, you know that Bob's not writing any of this, right? Bob can barely draw. He's still not writing this stuff. And so they found out about Bill, and DC Comics said, Bill, just report to us, we'll give you this, you don't need to go to Bob. And I guess Bob was, had no choice, and so, and Bill was not the only ghostwriter by that point, so all these guys would then start to report to DC instead of Bob. They still worked together, talked about stories, but Bob was not Bill's boss per se. And Bill got a page rater, so I don't know what it was in the thirties, like $2-3 a page or something, I don't know, and that's all you get. But Bob negotiated a better deal for himself, I don't know what he got, more than Bill for sure. And then when the Batman TV show of the sixties debuted, there's no print record of this, but there's enough rumors in the industry that, Bob sold his share of Batman, or somehow sold out and got a lot, and also royalties, I think, at that time. And Bill got nothing. Not a thing. He did write one episode of the series, though. Source of pride for him. I don't want to spoil this because it's in the movie, it's really briefly actually showed. He was the only comics artist to make the lead and write an episode of the TV show. And for those of you that know the show, it was a big deal. It was, I mean, my dad was not a superhero guy. He said, I was in college when the show was on. We would skip class if it was at night. The show was at night, we had a class at night, so everyone would skip class to watch it, even if we didn't like that. It was a cultural phenomenon. That's how big it was. And Bob, capitalized on it.
What are you writing now and what's your next?
So I have a couple of funny picture books next up. And then my next nonfiction, I don't know yet. I wrote a book on Robin Williams that I have not been able to sell. I thought that would be an easy one, but it hasn't been. And not just about Robin, groundbreaking comedian, but Robin, quiet humanitarian. So many lovely things that he didn't talk about, and he actually asked other people not to talk about. Like one example is he would go to children's hospitals on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day and entertain kids. And he just said to the hospital, just please don't tell the press. This is between me and them. And they did, they respected that. But then after he died, I would read about him, and I would see in comments to articles about him, like people would just be coming out of the woodwork saying, yeah, I met Ron once. He didn't want me to tell anybody this, but this is what the nice thing he did. So I compiled all this stuff. And then I wrote a Vietnam War book, which I'm just about to shop around. That'll get a lot of rejections. But I'm gonna try. Meaning that the reason is that I write primarily for grade school, and they often think very, very narrowly. And so editors will say, well, Vietnam War is not a topic that they cover in the curriculum. So neither is Batman. Neither is half the stuff that we publish. It doesn't mean that it's not a good story. These books are not only done for schools, they're done for humans that are out in the world. So if it's a good story, it should be published. That's my voice. Marketing doesn't agree. Yes?
You work with it like in a career with that.
So yeah, my picture books, I have pretty different kinds of books, but my picture books are illustrated. And I work with a different artist each time by chance. I usually work with someone again if you like. But yeah, it's not the writer's choice usually, unless you're New York Times bestseller 6 years in a row. Which is fine. The editors want the writers to be happy. So what usually happens with me is the editor will say, who would you like, of course, some people that you'd like to work with, and they'll also usually have their own suggestions, and we just talk about them. And I've never been stuck with them. I've always gone to work with an artist that either I asked for or who they suggested and I thought was good for the project. But I know writers that are sometimes, matched up with someone whose work they don't think is a good fit. And my thoughts are, why should you just say something? I want to know the thing. Some writers are afraid to.
Have you ever been to Western Kansas before?
Not that I can remember. I've been to Kansas, but not Western stuff. I drove from Denver. I had a good book on tape, and I got to see your beautiful, heartland and countryside. And my way back to Hayes later, I already have a couple places picked out to maybe stop and take some photos. Thanks for your hospitality.
And usually they cannot go spry.
Oh, I'm not eating the grass. It's okay.